Imagine transforming the way millions of people handle money in one of the world's largest and most dynamic countries, Nigeria. Tayo, founder of Paga, did just that. With a network of over 25,000 agents and a staggering 14 trillion naira in transactions processed. Over the last decade, Paga has revolutionized the financial landscape as one of the early consumer payment companies on the continent. Today, they've served over 23 million users, enabling everything from bill payments, international remittances, to subscription payments. In this episode of The Startup Leap, Tayo shares his incredible journey, highlighting how he built the platform that serves global companies as well as consumers.
The very best athletes in the world have coaches. So you as an entrepreneur, as a CEO, as a leader, should have a coach.
Get ready for an inspiring conversation packed with actionable insights. Welcome to The Startup Leap, the #1 podcast interviewing startup founders who have taken the leap into starting their own businesses.
Here on The Startup Leap, we hear real, raw, and relatable stories of these entrepreneurs, how they've navigated taking the leap, and the decisions they've made. We're your hosts.
I'm Yvonne.
And I'm Maria.
And this is the Startup Leap podcast.
Yvonne and Maria are partners at Local Globe and OpenSeed VC, respectively. Local Globe and OpenSeed are independent of the Startup Leap podcast. Any statements made by Maria, Yvonne, or the Startup Leap guests are solely their view and are not advice. Endorsements by the Startup Leap, its guests, Maria and Yvonne.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Startup Leap. Today we have Tayo Oviosu, founder and CEO of Paga. Paga is revolutionizing payments in the African landscape and has been doing this for the past 15 years. The African landscape for Fintech is massive, over 230 billion, and Paga has been doing this. It's one of the OGs in the industry, and we're so excited to have Tayo in the house with us today. Tayo, welcome.
Thank you very much, Maria. I appreciate it. And Yvonne, thanks for the invite. Looking forward to the conversation.
Same.
Absolutely.
Maybe we just go right into it. For those who don't know, what is Paga? What does it do? What is it trying to achieve?
Yeah, so Paga is a fintech here on the African continent, and really what we're focused on doing is making it simple for 1 billion people to access and use money. If you look across the continent today, we think there's a problem with access to finance, right? And it's not that people are not banked; people are banked. They have access to bank accounts, places to put their money. But efficient ways to use their money or to access credit is very difficult, or to just make everyday payments. And this is what Paga is trying to solve, right? So we're going after this massive goal that we want to make it simple for 1 billion people across the continent to access and use money. And we started in Nigeria, where we think is the hardest of them all, but also one of the biggest opportunities that exist on the continent as well, in terms of a singular country and market.
And when you think about the business today, a lot of similarities with Venmo, Cash App, and Alipay. What would you say are some of the nuances around what you're building in Africa versus other models in the world today?
Yeah, that's a great question, Yvonne. So at the core of what we have done is that we have built what we call the Paga engine, right? And this is our proprietary system that holds any type of financial account, multi-currency, cloud-based, and has all the different payment rails built in, right? Connectivity to the banks, connectivity to local switches, international switches with Visa, issuing of cards with Visa. So that core engine, we go to market through 3 different channels on it. And one of them is very similar to PayPal, Venmo, or Alipay that you mentioned, where on your phone, whether it's a smartphone or a feature phone, you can have the Paga app, right? And you can have money in the app, and you can link your bank accounts if you have bank accounts, or you can just keep money there, get a Visa card, and you can perform your transactions just conveniently as a consumer. So that's our consumer product. So on the consumer product side, it's very similar. There's some nuances in it, because I remember very clearly, like the first time I got to meet Jack Dorsey, and we're jamming. So he's the founder of Block, and we're talking about Cash App, and he was shocked that you could pay all your bills directly from Paga. right? Because Cash App can't do that, right? Like it's not. So that's a local nuance that we have with all of this. And he was also shocked at instant payments, that we could, from the Paga app, send money to any bank account, instant real time, receive money instant real time, right? So that's a big nuance. So the consumer app is one part of our business. The second part of our business is that we've actually, a couple years ago, opened up the Paga engine to other companies to let them leverage the infrastructure that we have built and embed it into their own services, right? So that is our platform infrastructure business. We have now over 200 companies that are leveraging our infrastructure. And then the third part of our business is a merchant payments, retail merchant payments business, which we call Doroki, actually. So it's a separate brand. And it's the software that a supermarket or a restaurant, a small business like that, retail business, would use to manage their entire business. So their inventory management, the customer relationships, the vendor management, right? And it's what they will use at the point of sale to actually process the transactions that come through as well. So these are the three parts of our business. And, lots of local nuances, different from
I bet.
Yeah, a ton of different things. But, at the core of it, I always say the problem we're all solving in payments is a key exchange problem that at a 10,000 foot level looks the same, but how you solve it is
Can be
different.
very different. Can be very different. I love that. You mentioned your three products. Which came first? Because I think the benefit of having 15 years experience in an evolving industry is that your entry point now would probably be different from someone who's did it 10 years ago or someone who did it 5 years ago. So maybe
Correct.
walk us through the evolution of how you thought about product from that 0 to 1 and how it evolved a little bit over time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Wow. Look, the consumer product was the first thing because I was trying to solve a problem I had, right? I was banked with two banks, yet every Friday I had to go get cash, send someone to the bank to go get wads of cash, go out to Lagos. And I was like, this just makes no sense. I found myself on a date once and none of my cards worked. And I had
And she's like,
How awkward.
yeah, right? I went to 3 ATMs before I finally got cash. I left her there, right? And I came back, I was so embarrassed. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way to do this, right? And so that's what really got us started. And when we launched that consumer,
It was a date that was a fuel to the fire to start Paga.
yeah, well, it was a real trigger of like, oh my God, like this thing thinking about is a real problem. Like you really got it. Like I was already thinking about Paga with the idea, but still, like it really like pushed me down that path. Funny enough, actually, one of the ideas I was thinking about at the time, this particular lady I went on this date with, I was thinking about. She was also interested in that other idea, so I actually ended up not doing that.
I feel like that's another conversation.
Yeah. We laugh about it now, actually, because we see each other now, both married to different people, and see each other once in a while. But so we started out with the consumer business and the consumer app on SMS, by the way, like literally.
Oh, so this was USSD? Was it SMS or USSD?
SMS. I would type a message, send 1,000 if I want to send you 1,000 naira, and I'll put your phone number. You have to remember, this was back in the day. There's no cloud. There's no Twilio. There's nothing like that, right? So we literally had because there are 4 mobile networks in Nigeria, we had 4 GSM modems plugged into our server, USB GSM modems, plugged into our server. And you had physical servers. So plugged into our server.
Oh my God.
And it will get the message. If I was an MTN, it will go to the MTN one, right? Gets the message. And then what happens is we then do an automated phone call back to you. So you get this phone call.
Wow.
Hi, this is Paga. We're calling to confirm send money transaction for 1,000 to this number. And we tell you the number. Please enter your PIN to confirm. And then you put your PIN number, and then the money went. Right? And literally then, Maria, if you're not a customer already of Paga, you will get an SMS says you received 1,000 naira, you need to register to get the money. And then once you register, you see the money in your account and you can keep going, right? So the very first version of Paga was by SMS. And then, I mean, not too long, we found out it was really confusing, actually.
Yeah.
Because when I got the call back, they're like, hello. Like there's nobody on the other side of that, right? So, but anyways, we eventually evolved it into an app, etc., right? And so fast forward, so that was the first product, and we launched with money transfers and bill payments and airtime and data. So those are the three core things we launched with. And then we very quickly also launched the concept of the agent network.
You guys were the pioneers of the whole agent banking network, right?
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, we were. And in fact, globally, we were a pioneer of one particular thing that started out of Nigeria, which was on the agent networks, an agent where the agent performed the transaction for you rather than just fund your account. So if you look at, M-Pesa, all these other systems, they fund your account and then you do the transaction, right? And with us, and this was a quirk that came up because of the way the regulation was in Nigeria at the time. The way the regulation was, there were really strong limits on what a consumer could do on their account, how much they could spend, and were really low. However, it was up to us to set the limits of the agent. And so we're like, oh, well, Nigerians anyways like to tell people to do stuff on their behalf. Right?
Why not productize that?
Yeah, and also that's going to save us the education cost.
Yeah.
What you really are trying to do is you're trying to pay your DSTV, right? Just do it here. Rather than go to the DSTV office and stand in queue, go in traffic, just do it right here next to your house. And so that's how we launched the agent network, and that concept of the agent performs a transaction on your behalf. And that took off. Right, it took off like wildfire. Actually, with the help of MultiChoice, DSTV.
How so?
We were just very fortunate actually because I remember being at the gym one day talking to a couple guys and some guy who I've been engaged with for months at the gym. I see him all the time. We say hi. I finally said, "What do you do?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm the MD of MultiChoice Nigeria." And I'm like, "What? You're the guy I've been trying to meet." He's like, "Really?" And lo and behold, right? And here he was. And so had a meeting with him and his team, and I said, "Look, we have this great app. We'd love to put DSTV payments in the app, so you can just pay your DSTV." And they hummed and hawed, and they said, "We don't really think that's really of interest. People go to our stores to pay, right? We have all these retailers around Nigeria. That's where people go to pay. It's not, not that interesting.
Not priority for us, yeah."
They gave some excuses. So we left quite disappointed. 3 days later, his colleague calls me and says, "Tayo, we've been thinking about your solution. And that currently we have a separate problem than what you came to solve. And I wonder if you can solve it for us. We have 300 retailers in Nigeria, separate from our DSTV stores that everybody sees, that are branded stores. 300 retailers that are not branded. When these people collect a payment, if Maria goes there to make a payment, what they do is they call a special line at DSTV and they say, 'Maria has paid. Please turn her on.' And so they turn you on in trust. They don't yet have the money. And then that person has 12 hours to get the money to DSTV. And if they don't see the money in 12 hours, they will turn you off. But you could have 12 hours of free TV time. And so, particularly during Champions League, they see people taking advantage of it.
Okay.
Right? And they lose 12 hours. And I was like, oh my God, we can solve that because we will just make all of them Paga agents. They'll fund their accounts and they'll make the payments to you. And in real time, you have the money. And she was like, amazing. Let's talk. So we went in and actually it turns out, and by then we actually hadn't had Paga agents yet. We built the application but we hadn't yet rolled out to anybody. So actually, the very first Paga agent was someone that MultiChoice took us to, Cable Digit, and very first guy.
Interesting.
And so we trained him on the platform. I remember he put his first 25,000 naira. He didn't want to put much more. And then literally before the end of the day, he called me saying that money's finished. So how do I fund? So I had to teach him again how to count. So he went to fund the account in the process, and then he put 50K, then he put 100K, and then just like went off.
So was DSTV the transition was that the first exploration into the B2B, like kind of going from consumer to using this B2B to acquire consumer?
So it was, in some way, right? Because it became the first killer product, because it became the first thing that we could say we were the only ones offering this thing, and that a lot of people then keyed in on, and they allowed us to do this amazing integration to start, right? Basically, because when you paid on Paga, then your DSTV got turned on as long as you had light connected to your device. But the integration was this. Okay. Get this. So the integration was an email. When you paid on Paga, we sent an email to a dedicated email box, and they had 2 staff watching that email box.
Wow. And then they would switch it on? That's crazy.
And they would switch it on. So for the first 6 months, that was the integration.
Doing things that don't scale. I mean, 2 things I'm taking out of this is that you have to do like crazy things to simulate the reality before the reality actually happens. And I think the second thing that's very important, actually, to your earlier point, is the flexibility on what you first propose and what they come back with. Because you met the guy at your gym, and he's like, no, I don't want to, not a priority for us. But then they reach out to you, and it's like something completely different from what you were initially like proposing. So kind of gives me the whole thing of your initial idea, stay very flexible on that, because the problem might be bigger than you actually think, or different, but in the same domain.
Exactly.
And it also highlights the value of just spending time with customers. You cannot underestimate, until you actually spend time with customers, understand their pain points, and then build for them and understand like the reality of what they're facing.
I would say probably the first 3-4 years of Paga following this, I was at the DSTV office at least once a week.
Whoa, you're a staff.
They knew me. Everybody knew me. I'll just show up and I'll just and actually there's another story around that, where there was a day I showed up and I could hear, Kappa was her name, and Kappa was really upset about something. And I'm like, what's going on? And she was like, we have this problem where we send a reminder SMS to all our customers every month, but we don't know if their numbers are legit or not, right? Or are still on. So we're wasting money. And someone has quoted us some crazy amount of money to clean that database up. And I was like, I'm like, I think we can do that for you. And she's like, really? Can you? I'm like, yeah. What if because we have this system, which we still use till today, called MMP, which we never productized for anybody else, but it's essentially Twilio, is the way to think about it, right? It can connect to SMS, voice, any of these things, and it's in-house product within a separate product from Paga, but we just never went to sell it to anyone. And I said, we can send an SMS, and we get the delivery notification. So we know if the SMS was delivered or not. Now, if it was not delivered, we can also place a voice call onto that phone, and we can tell if it was picked up or not, right? So we eventually devised this thing for her. Like literally within a day, we came up with a workflow, etc., and then we put a quote, and they immediately accepted the quote. And when we're thinking about the pricing, we're like, man, is this too high? Is it not too high? And then she immediately accepted it. We're like,
you're like, it was too low.
Too low.
And then a year later, she told me we were way lower than that.
Oh, wow.
But it was like literally for us, like, I kid you not, it was less than a day of work for us, right? So for us, it was already like, oh wow, that's a lot of money, right? And at the time, that money paid 2 months of salary. So I was like, this is amazing. These guys are giving us 2 months of salary runway on something that didn't take us that long to do, But again, it was a throwaway piece of work, but it helped them. it cleaned up their database from four, and they had like 40 million numbers or something crazy. Cleaned up the database, and then they're able to build back from there. But again, it just reminded me something that Tim Draper said to me once. He says, if the approach that you're going after is not working, sometimes you may have to bend a little bit to make sure you do something, things that keep the lights on, and then you go back to what you're doing. But so to come back to your original thing, I mean, like there have been a lot of twists and turns, right, along the way. A lot of things that we tried that just didn't work. Mm-hmm. In 2014, we had this big strategy meeting, and we said, actually, it did not make sense to continue pushing the consumer app because, there was no way to KYC people digitally. Mm-hmm. During 2014, there was no bank verification number, no national ID, right? No digital way to verify a passport or a driver's license. And the limits the central bank had set were really low. So until all of those things changed, and then the last point was like, we didn't have USSD on the telcos. Mm-hmm. So until all of those things changed, it didn't make sense to put $1 into it. So let's continue building, and we'll continue using ourselves and innovating on it. But let's double down on that agent business. So we actually doubled down on the agent business, and I think that's where people got to know us, a lot initially. And then we really mobilized the industry and created the industry association. I was the second chairman of it. Actually, Jay, my co-founder, is currently the chairman. And rallied everyone together to lobby for the things that we wanted from the regulator. And it got those. So then in 2020, we relaunched the consumer app, right? So now you can download Paga from the App Store, and in less than 3-4 minutes, you're registered, verified, and you can get going.
Just on the agent network piece in particular, one of the questions often raised about businesses that have agent networks is the scalability of those networks, right? And so I'm just curious how you thought about that in the early days, because I know that you had shop storefronts where the agents were. How has that changed over time?
Yeah. I mean, when we started, we focused on storefronts with 3 walls and a roof, we used to say, right? Meaning that if you didn't lock the door at night, that's okay. Like, at least the place to shake. And people who are selling some sort of product, right? Now, what we saw happen in the last few years actually was led mostly by other competitors. Was actually just a guy on the street becoming an agent and getting a POS device. I think that's actually an anomaly, and I think the regulator now wants to clamp down on that. But I think you're right. It's very difficult to scale an agent business because there's a lot of in-person engagement, right? And to do it well, you have to have that personal touch with the agent. If you want to do it well, you could leverage an aggregator model, which we eventually switched to an aggregator model. But initially, we had feet on the ground. And I think as of 2020, we had about 500 people on our staff, feet on the ground in the agent network. Coming out of the pandemic, we changed our approach to an aggregator-led model. So we actually had to cut that down. And now we have, over 100,000 points of presence. But what we realize is that actually the agents themselves open multiple locations. Right, so one agent on average has 2 locations. So the actual individuals that are agents on Paga, about 50,000 individuals, but actually have 100,000 locations, right? Some of them have like 5 locations, right? So I think once people really key in on understanding the business and understanding how it runs and understanding how they make money, then they build on it, and then it starts building itself out.
Got it. I would love to talk a little bit about how the idea came about beyond the dates. How did you decide that, okay, this thing had legs for you to maybe give up something meaningful to kind of build it? How did you go about the validation process? Or did you just have conviction in the problem from prior experience? And maybe this is a good time to give us a sense of your background prior to Paga and then that inflection point as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, so prior to Paga, I was I had moved back to Nigeria in 2008 to join a private equity fund called Travant Capital. Before that, I was in the venture capital in Silicon Valley, in-house at Cisco, and then prior to that, business school at Stanford Business School. So while I was at Cisco, and still in the Valley, I think is really where I got my entrepreneurial bug, like really cemented, because I got to spend time with a lot of startups. And really, that experience helped me realize that startups truly are the engine of growth in any economy. Small businesses, I should say. And, and one of the things, I was fortunate to serve on 2 boards for Cisco. And while I was on those boards, the people who I respected the most on the boards and when their input were people who had been operators at some point. And so I actually thought to myself, okay, I think long term I want to be an investor. I want to stay in investing, but I think I need to go operate, right? And so actually I was thinking of leaving Cisco to go start a business in the US. But then a few of I was working on a project in South Africa for Cisco, and a few of my friends started encouraging me to think about coming back to Nigeria.
What was your sentiment at the time?
Yeah, exactly. So, and one of Fred Swanica said something that really hit me at the time. He said, Tayo, Nigeria, this was in 2007, says Nigeria reminds him of where India and China were 15 years prior. Like, just think of the people who went back to India 15 years ago and the companies that they built, Tata, Infosys, ArcelorMittal. These are no longer just Indian conglomerates. These are global names. And that's the kind of impact you can go have if you move back to Nigeria. And so, I remember being, I was hiking in Bhutan, one of the most beautiful countries in the world, and overlooking this amazing hills when I made the decision that I was gonna move back home, or I was gonna seriously explore it and move back. So long story short, I moved back, and I thought I would be in this private equity firm for like 5 years, right? Before really get to understand the market better, get to know rebuild connections and all these other things. But in the first 3 months, I actually had a horrible experience, at this firm. I love the people, actually most of everyone, I would say. But actually the work experience was not great. And so I decided to leave. And the day I decided to leave, I went to, the weekend I decided to leave, I should say, I was in Abuja. And I remember sitting at the airport in Abuja. I was too early for my flight. And I wrote down 20 different ideas that I thought would have legs in Nigeria. And I said, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call a friend of mine who has a consulting firm and see if I could consult with him for 3 days a week and spend 2 days using his office on my own ideas. But I wanted to make sure that I went into an office. I didn't want to have to be at home, right? And so I wanted to keep the same schedule I was keeping. And he actually was like, oh, awesome. I actually have some work, you could join us on some couple projects, etc. So I did that. And that was also great because it gave me the swankiest office in VI, right? Or one of the swankiest offices. When I would have meetings, I'll call people to come to my office. And then the receptionist also knew, oh, you're looking for Paga? Okay.
Yes. You always have to big it up in the beginning. You always have to make it look fresh.
I was always like, we, and it was only me. And so that was interesting. I mean, so I did that and spent the 2 days looking at different ideas. Eventually honed in on what is now Paga. But when I did hone in on what is Paga, and I actually just went through different ideas, and then a couple of the people on that team actually were helping me. At lunch, I talked about my ideas, I threw stones at it, and had a few other people doing the same, meet with regularly. And eventually I went back to that book, and those 20 ideas, number 10 was mobile payments. And number 11 was banking the unbanked. And there was a line from 11 to 10 that says, do these two go together? And do they go with number? And number 3 was cloud payroll, right? And so these are all mobile payments, the idea of that, I already experienced PayPal, and I'd already experienced, and actually I'd experienced using SMS to pay on PayPal, which again was a product that they also killed. But when they launched it, I actually tried it. It worked. It was great. But but then we didn't have apps. If you remember back then, this was like pre-business school for me, so there were no apps. But it was just a web product back then when PayPal was just a web product. And so I had a conviction about the idea, and I think the thing for me was when I was looking at ideas, I said, I wanted something that passed the big idea test. That if I was going to pour my life into it, I wanted to be something that could be massive and would have massive impact on people's lives, etc. And I could do very well financially from it as well, right? And so that was sort of the focus, and this for me passed that test. And everybody I told the idea was like, oh my god, that could be massive. Oh my god, that could be. So it just was very quick to. Of all the ideas I looked at, it's actually the one I spent the least amount of time on before saying yes, this is what I'm going to pour my life into. And at that point, then I resigned my friend's consultancy, gave him a 2 weeks notice. And of course asked if I could continue using his office, right? And then I turned my energy 100% into it.
Switching gears slightly, one of the things that you've spoken very highly about is your co-founder, Jay. How did the two of you meet?
Yeah, no, honestly, it's been, there are a couple people in my journey that I would say have been just massive blessings, and Jay's one of them. And the other is Eric, our CTO. Lots of people have been blessings along the way, but these two really stand out and worth some very special mention. Jay I met at business school. He would have been a year behind me at Stanford Business School, but he deferred and came a year later. But when he came, I was still in the Bay Area, and so we used to hang out from time to time. And then when I moved back to Nigeria, he was one of the people that I let know I moved back. And then when he moved back, I was aware that he was back. So now when I was working on Paga and thinking about who to bring on this journey with me, or to ask to come on this journey with me, he kept coming back to mind for me, right? Someone who I had a great deal of respect for, have a great deal of respect for, his intellect, his ability, and someone who I thought I could, even though at the time we're like close, I thought I could, I would enjoy having a beer with and hanging out with socially. And so the way he tells the story, he's like, I invited him to the dingiest, the dingiest place in BI, right? And I put him in some corner. I had to tell him this idea that I was working on that I hadn't told anybody about. I was keeping it very top secret. And and I shared the idea with him, and typical Jay fashion, he was interested, but said, let me go think about it. And then he went and thought about it and came back and said, yeah, let's do this, but I need this much time to quit my job, give him a notice so I don't, burn any bridges there, etc. So he started working with us actually before
Interesting.
Before joining, so officially. So he joined officially. I didn't start working October 2009. Yeah, and then joined officially in 2010.
So you've obviously shared how you and Jay met, but obviously this is a highly technical business, so I'm sure you would have required the CTO quite early on in your journey. Curious around how you met the CTO, what was some of the key things you were thinking about, given that it's a regulated product? And also on the other side of that, from what I understand, he's based in Mexico, right? There is this ongoing debate on distributed teams versus working together. How have you navigated that? And what's your perspective on remote versus working in person?
Yeah, no, it's been amazing with Eric. He has been our CTO from day one, pretty much. And the way we met was just fortuitous. One of my best friends out of business school, it's his brother, right? And so he had just introduced us, and I stayed with him in Ethiopia when I went to visit in Ethiopia. And then when he came to Lagos, he was living in Ethiopia for many years. And when he came to Lagos, he stayed with me, and we just were sharing ideas of what we're working on. And I shared with him the idea of Paga, what we're doing at Paga. And I said, we had actually gone to India to find a company that could license their platform to us. But I thought I needed somebody who could translate the business requirements we had into technical requirements for the Indian company. And so he took that on, and his company took that consultancy on with us. And we went through this long process, and then culminated in him and I going to India together to meet with this company. And almost every day after we had sessions with them, at dinner, Eric would be like, "I'm worried about the questions they're asking me. Like, they're asking these questions. I think we can build this better than they can." And by the end of the time in India, I asked the owner of the company, the CEO, and I said, "What would it take to achieve our requirements?" And says, "Oh, we're going to have to rebuild." I said, "Oh, if you're going to rebuild, then why don't we pay you to build and you hand over the code to us?" And it's like, "No, we can't do that." And so we had a big decision to make. We went back to, because Eric was like, "Look, why don't I talk to my partners and let's look at us building for Paga." And so he went back to his partners in his business, and they had a fully fledged tech business in Ethiopia. They had a number of products they developed, and they did some custom work as well. And so they went back and decided that they would love to partner with us. And to show their commitment, they came up with the idea that they would invest $100,000 in our seed round of their own money. And they will commit Eric and a team dedicated to Paga.
That's so interesting.
And we own the code, etc. We pay the salaries, we do all that kind of stuff, but we own the code. It's our, it secures the business from that perspective. And so we made the decision to enter that partnership with Apposit. And so we did that for about 8 years or so. And then in 2020, along the way, we always kept saying, "Oh, we should be one company, really. We should be one company."
Yeah.
Right? And then finally, I think in 2019, we're like, "Okay, you know what? Let's just pull this trigger." Right? And so we went through the process and closed the deal eventually in 2020, and acquired Apposit into Paga. But we've always, because their team was in Ethiopia, we've always had a remote element to our work at Paga.
Even before it was cool, even before COVID, and it was popular.
Cool, yeah. And not only remote work, also language barrier.
Right, yeah.
Because even though our Ethiopian colleagues could speak English, it's not their first language, and there's still a communication barrier. And what that led to is like we have a very detailed, documented system. Everything is documented. The product is designed, the process flow is there, it's written out. You go to Confluence, you can see everything documented. It's a super well documented system, right? And everything is understood before anybody lifts a finger to go build, right? And you ask a question. Now, so from day one we have that, and then we eventually start hiring a team in Nigeria. And actually, interesting, the first set of developers we had in Nigeria came out of a company that I had invested in, and then they were sort of pseudo closing, right? In the sense that, so the company no longer really is in existence, but it was a gaming company, but we still have gaming titles out there. So there's still some dividends that we all get from the gaming titles, but the guys were, disbanding.
Yeah.
And so I was like, "Hey, why don't you come join us at Paga?" Right? And that's how, our first 3 engineers in Nigeria eventually joined. And now our team is about half. We have about half the developers in Nigeria, half in Ethiopia. We also have a small team in Vietnam on the development side. And they primarily work on our mobile apps.
Got it.
The front end of our mobile apps. And then now we have some people in India as well on the platform side of our business. So, so we do have a distributed team. One person in Germany, right? But now, we're fully, and then Eric is in Mexico, as you described. And actually,
oh wow,
Eric moved to Mexico was because we were thinking of launching in Mexico.
Interesting.
And him and his wife moved from Ethiopia to the US, so they decided, okay, why don't we go to Mexico? And that way there can be some continuity of culture, etc., in the company in Mexico. Now we decided not to do Mexico, but they stayed, right? And so they've been there. They're now Mexican residents, etc. Right? And so yeah. So my view on distributed, by the way, is that it can work. I think it really depends on how you execute it. We've been very thoughtful about, particularly, the main hubs, right? So in Nigeria, we have a few offices across Nigeria, and then we have Ethiopia, and we treat everyone the same. So if we're having a Christmas party, there's a Christmas party there too, right? Like,
Okay.
they have their own Christmas is a different day from ours, so we respect that. We announce it to the team. There's cross-cultural kind of understanding things that we do across each side. So policies-wise, we've had to harmonize policies and all these things, and make sure that there's some local nuances to the policies, but like make sure that generally speaking, the experience for someone working at Paga is the same, whether they're in Nigeria or
Across the board. Yeah. Across the cultures, across the languages. That is very interesting. Given, I think at the time you started, it was not common. So you probably had to build the playbooks from scratch. I'm curious, transitioning more on the regulatory piece because you are a fintech product and you started when I feel like fintech startups, especially in nascent markets, are actually the pioneers of regulation. They tell the regulators what's possible, and then the
Mm,
regulators play catch up, and then they probably don't even know what to do, and they have to work together. You had mentioned earlier about a consortium of people you had come together to kind of engage with the government. I'd love to talk about your regulatory journey. When you
yeah.
started, what was the landscape like? What, mental models did you use as you were thinking about partnering versus, being upfront, regulated? How did that evolve over time? If you could, giving your payments company, if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, look, when I started, I didn't know much, right? I'd never engaged with any regulator anywhere in the world, and I didn't know anyone at the CBN personally.
Yeah.
I literally, my first conversation with someone at the CBN was a cold call into the phone number on the website, and within 3 transfers, I actually spoke to the person who led the team that drafted the regulation for our space.
Mm,
So in some cases, actually recently I remember a conversation this year where the position I was taking with the central bank was one that actually, in their view, and actually I could see why they think that, is not the view they would expect me to take for my business. And I'm like, actually, because I don't think that's the right thing from the government's perspective to do. And it's hard sometimes making those calls, and taking that position. But at the same time too, I'm cognizant that we're not just trying to build a business that just wins at all costs. We also,
yeah.
an institution for the country that that is actually on solid foundation as well. But I
That's
encourage. But on the question of do you engage the regulators, I generally encourage people to engage. I do think that if depending on what you're doing, right? Like I was talking to a potential partner today, and I know they're going for some licenses, and I'm like, if I were in your shoes, actually, I wouldn't go for those licenses because you could just partner with Paga and use our platform as a service. That's
That's the
exactly.
question I have. Yeah, so in your early days, because you couldn't have gone through the licenses in the day, like in the day one, did you think about like how did you think about partnerships, and how did you know it was time to kind of move away from those partnerships and establish your own
Yeah.
direct licenses with the government? How did you think about that?
Yeah, so we actually took 2 approaches. One is we engaged immediately and said that we
Okay.
probably should get licensed.
Okay.
But at the same time, too, we also engaged InterSwitch and said, we don't want to replicate what you've done, right? We want to work with you. And we started by working with them. Now, it broke down and the pricing didn't make sense. And so that so that sort of broke down. And so we had to then go, and they were also focused on so many other things that we had to just go and build additional capabilities ourselves. But I fast forward today and I said, the reason why we opened up all of what we've built to other people is that you can now accelerate your business without having to
Mm.
worry about rebuilding all of these things.
Yeah.
So if you are if you're a branch, right, all the bill pay on your app, you don't have to go talk to all these billers again. You just do that
Yeah.
through us, right?
Yeah.
You are omnibiz, right? You don't have to go and get all these different licenses. You can integrate all the payment collection. Facebook, to pay for your Facebook ads in Nigeria, that's coming through Paga, right? So you can do all of that. Qatar Airways, you want to buy a plane ticket, right? You can just do that through us, right? So all of these capabilities we have built out, and the licensing and the regulatory cover, etc. And so now by opening up our infrastructure, then you can focus on what your actual use case is for your business.
Yeah.
Plug in the various parts of the infrastructure to what you're doing.
Well, I'm curious. I mean, you're working with all these incredible companies, but over a decade period that you've been building Paga for, were there any moments where you felt like, damn, like this is a real unknown whether we're gonna make it or not? Like, where have you had some bumps in the journey where you've had to like really stop and think, wow, like what are we gonna do here?
Yeah, no, we've had a lot of bumps in the journey, and I think it's built a lot of resilience, right? And I think for me, 2020 particularly was a rough one, right? What happened with the pandemic? I actually say to people I only came out of the pandemic last year, right? Which is weird, because it was just. And if thinking back to it, and I really do need to stop and reflect a lot more, right, about that period. But I was literally in the midst of getting ready to launch a new market, right, in Mexico.
Whoa.
I'd done everything needed to just about be there to launch. Lesson learned there is like I probably should not have talked about it publicly before I did it. Right?
Oh.
And then also lesson learned there, which is unfortunate, hasn't changed, is that investors do not understand an African company going to other continents.
Right.
And that's unfortunate, because I was talking to another company this week that is launched in Mexico and has a business in Africa, and they're struggling to get Mexican investors to see the opportunity. And I'm like, are you kidding? The business that they're launching, they have in Mexico, is a local business. It just happens to be that the same business model works in Uganda, and they have that in Uganda.
Yeah.
So anyways, I think it's short-sighted, but it's just what it is. And I think that was a big bump in the road for us, because we had to really rethink sort of, how we drive our business forward. And it was difficult to raise capital in 2020. And actually we were in the midst of the hockey stick growth that we've seen in Paga. So we're at the very beginning of it, so we couldn't tell that story very well at the time. And so if you look at what we've done since inception, I think we've processed about 19 trillion naira, so about $40 billion. And more than half of that has been over the last 3 years, right?
Wow.
And that's just been fantastic growth across the entire business. But it's because our team has had to make some really tough decisions about what we do, what we don't do, and how we run the business and how we focus it. And I think that's been that real discipline around strategy and execution, and then getting the business profitable last year for the first time was just amazing for us. Like, I think that's been like part of us, that it's not just about growth for the sake of growth. We want to build a profitable business. But there have been bumps in the road, and I think we've just been fortunate to have a great team of people around us, both the leadership team as well as the investors, who come together to say, how do we solve whatever bumps they are, right? Yeah.
So I would love to hear a little bit about your first round. You mentioned that the tech company you work with invested 100K. So was this before an angel round? After? How did you think about your very first round funding Paga?
Yeah. So the very first round, I mean, from the beginning, it was clear to me that we had to raise a lot of money to achieve the goal. And so we had to raise our outside capital. Now, I bootstrapped for the first 6 months of the company, and then started raising angel money. And at the time in 2009, angel was not something well known in Nigeria, right? So I had to explain to people what I was talking about. Pass the hat around a little bit to existing people who had been advising me, and then also to friends and people I'd worked with in Silicon Valley, And I think in that first round, our first big break was getting Tim Draper to invest. And a friend of mine from business school, I had caught up with her, and at the end of the conversation, she was like, "I think Tim would love this idea. Can I share it with him?" And so she did, and then I had a call with Tim, and he had a couple other people on the call. Interestingly, one of them you would know, Mark from Smile ID, right?
Oh, I know
Oh
him.
yeah,
Yeah, Straub, I think.
Yeah, Mark Drug, yeah, was on
yeah.
the call,
We're investors in
and
Small ID.
so Mark helped him was one of the two people that helped him with the diligence on Paga, but at the end of that call, Tim, you knew he got it because it was like, this is currency for Africa, so he was just like, let's do this. So they did the diligence, and then they eventually invested in the business, and has been a great supporter since then. But that got us going, right?
Yeah. And for the benefit of those who don't know who Tim Draper is, could you give us a sense of how,
Yeah,
peculiar he was to that journey, like what
yeah.
that meant at the time for someone like that to invest in Paga?
So Tim Draper is one of the co-founders of Draper Fisher Jurvetson, which is one of the largest venture firms in Silicon Valley. And prior to that, his father, also well known in Silicon Valley, one of the people that really set up Silicon Valley, or helped in the formation of what we now call Silicon Valley. And he, is known for some of his early bets that he made in Hotmail, which eventually led the email revolution. And I think also in a couple of the Chinese firms that he invested in early days that have done really, really well. And so getting someone like that who hadn't yet done an investment on the continent, and who is well known in the angel world, was a big deal for us at the time. And he's been known to be one to be ahead of the valley in terms of investing in areas. Maybe most popular today is like he was the first, I think arguably the first biggest bet on Bitcoin, right? That I think he bought significant chunk of Bitcoin early days, and then made a big deal about what Bitcoin could be. So, he's always been at the forefront of of picking winners. So for us, that was a really big deal to have Tim on. And so we raised about $700,000 in that first round. And then we started raising institutional money. And our first institutional investor was Alethea Goodwell. So Tokumbo Ishmael, came in as our first institutional investor. And before we got the license, everybody we were talking to was like, you got to get the license first. And they came in before we got the license. And then once we got the license, then we're able to close the Series A, right?
Fantastic.
And then get going from there. Yeah, so I think the investment from Apposite, which you referenced, was one of those pre-rounds. I don't think it wasn't the very first one, but maybe like the second in between.
Okay. But it was early enough that they were taking risk as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
No. It definitely was definitely taking risk.
By the end of the show, we tend to go into reflective,
Okay.
poses, just kind of looking back
Yeah.
on the journey. 2009 was very different from now. I'm curious, what is one thing that at the time when you started was very massive in your mind? Like it was either a fear or a block or something that seemed really insurmountable. But now in retrospect, you probably over-indexed on it. And you probably shouldn't have thought of it, spend too much time on it. And also the converse. What is the one thing early on that you didn't expect, but it turned out completely different from what you thought? I know it might be, it's a big one, so maybe take time if you want to think about it, but it's two sides to a coin.
Yeah. I think there are two things that I thought were really massive that we probably, the first one was actually, could we build trust? And how you do it. And the reason why I pick that is because the way you do it is actually very straightforward. It turns out the way straightforward, which is just deliver what you said you're going to do, right? And that's it.
Mm.
And just really do what you said you do. And
Is
if you
there
do,
a tendency to overcomplicate it
it's like trying
at
to
the early stage? Yeah,
people
okay.
tell us where we're from. Just do what you said you do. Do it for the first person, second person. Keep doing it, right? I remember taking the DSTV story, right? They were like, "Are you going to put a collateral down? Because we're going to turn all these people on, and if you don't pay us, it's the same thing that those retailers were doing to us, right? And we would lose money." And I said to that, I remember saying to the CFO at the time, the day we don't pay you is the day our business ends. Because then, we can't put a collateral on everyone. So we have to pay, and we've not missed a day of pay, right? Or any other of our merchants. So just sticking to that, I think, is like really key. And then the second is actually thinking about how to do the connectivity to the banks and to all of those institutions, to the Visas of the world, card processing, that I think at the time it was such massive thing that if I had to go back, I would have taken a different approach to making it. And
And how would you have done that differently? I'm curious. Give us as much as you can or feel comfortable doing.
I think I would have gone into a more partnership mode with the banks where it's very clear to them that they win as well in allowing this integration to work, like really win financially as well. I think it took them a while to realize the opportunity, and I think there were things that we could probably have done early on to help them get there faster in realizing that, and not be scared about them, right?
Got it. Thank you.
And then I think on the other side, it's actually a bit tougher. So it's like what I didn't index on that could actually was a big deal.
You just didn't see it. Like maybe it was I feel like it's inevitable. You're not going to see everything, but what was the one thing that?
So the one thing that we did not see at all was this idea of opening our platform to other people.
Interesting.
We did not see that at all. And it literally came out of, again, because one of the things I do in the industry is just chat with other entrepreneurs, share ideas, brainstorm on what's going on for them. A couple of different entrepreneurs called me around the same time. And as they were talking through their challenges, I was like, wait a second, we can solve that. Oh, wow, Flutterwave can't solve that for you. Paystack can't do that for you. They can't do it the way we can do it. And it became very obvious quickly from a few conversations that we're sitting on something here. And I literally called in all the senior leaders, and literally within 3 months we had the first version out. And it was and until today, there's not a single service we have rolled out that we didn't have a ready-made client for. And be able to tell who the second possible client is and third possible client is, right? And we just have to stay ahead because now people see what we're doing, so people are going to try to call, right? But we just have to stay ahead, and we have to just continue working on quality of service. I was sharing with one of our clients last week that we, in October, increased the cores, the server cores of Paga 8 times to accommodate the growth that we've experienced in the last quarter, right? And we're making a ton of optimizations, spending a ton of time on optimizing and making sure that everything stays up and running, right? And so that's a big focus for us. That's something I didn't see early on. And now I say it and everyone's like, oh yeah, it makes sense, right? Even for me, I'm like, yeah, it makes sense, but we didn't see it at all.
Now you've had a really, really incredible journey from having obviously been to business school in the US, to having had that exposure to VC, being on boards and so on. One thing I'm really curious about is just throughout your journey, have there been any resources, individuals that you really look to as inspiration or just for guidance, advice, just for our listeners in case there's anything that you'd recommend they tap into as well?
No, they absolutely have been, and different people at different stages and the different journeys of my career. I mean, I said something recently. The best athletes have coaches, right? The very best athletes in the world have coaches. So
I'm a big believer in coaches.
so you as an entrepreneur, as a CEO, as a leader, should have a coach. And the last 4 years, I don't think I could have made it without my coach. She's been amazing, and I get unfettered advice, pushes me, and so I really appreciate that. And at different times, I've had people play that sort of role for me, even though I'm a normal coach, whether that be Jeremy Stoppelman, CEO of Yelp. For quite a period of time, we will meet every talk. And for him, actually, one of the things he said was, it's interesting, the problems I was facing in Nigeria are things that he has seen in Yelp in the US. Actually, it's like the idea is like, wow, people are people. Like, so it's a different context.
Yeah.
See them. And then folks like Andrew Ali here in Nigeria, who's been very helpful, Ngozi Edozian, super helpful, Tani Fafua, like there's so many people who like really, so I really think it's taken a village. When Paga turned 10 and most of these people were in the room, and it was just very emotional, right? Like, because
I bet
they've all been there for us, through thick and thin, encouraging, us when things, or helping us strategize or figure out different obstacles. And so I think it's really been a journey of a village coming together, right? And so I really encourage people. Entrepreneurship is a lonely journey, and so it's important to be able to have the people who have your back, and then open up to them, right? Because it's also like for you to open up, right, as well.
Absolutely. I love that. So get a coach if you're tinkering on an idea. Like, it's never too early.
Surround yourself with other
Awesome.
entrepreneurs as well,
Yes.
and tap into their experiences. This is great. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this, and I hope to see you guys in person soon.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Tayo.
All right. Thanks, Yvonne. Thanks, Maria. Cheers.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Startup Leap, TSL for short. Leave a review, tell us what you think of this episode on all of our platforms at The Startup Leap Pod. Do you have a question? Ask us and we'll ask our guests. Go to thestartupleap.io. See you next time.